Welcome to the deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely thrilled.
If you are the kind of curious learner who just isn't satisfied with surface level headlines, if you really want to pull back the curtain and understand the complex and frankly often controversial ideas shaping our culture today, you've come to the exact right place.
The exact right place, yeah.
But before we get into heavy lifting of today's analysis, do us a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the show.
Please do. It really is the best way to support what we do here.
It is. It ensures we can keep bringing you these incredibly thorough, comprehensive breakdowns of the most impactful texts out there.
And it allows us to tackle the kind of challenging, highly detailed material we have on the docket for today.
Precisely. Because today's mission is custom tailored for a very specific audience. If you follow the men's rights movement, if you're familiar with the discussions happening within the manosphere, or if you're just fascinated by the history of our cultural institutions and how they actually operate, this is for you.
Oh, totally.
We are looking at a highly explosive, incredibly detailed, new 2025 ebook by Conrad Riker. It's titled Men's Rights Matter: Why Feminism Has Gone Too Far.
That's right.
Riker makes this sweeping, historically grounded argument that our modern institutions, so from academia to the media to the family court system, have been systematically captured.
Captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies specifically.
Exactly. And we're going to unpack exactly how he constructs that argument. If you want to follow along or read it for yourself, we strongly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book.
Yeah, go grab it.
And definitely follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
But look, before we go any further, it's really crucial that we establish the framework for how we're approaching this text today.
Good point.
To you, the listener, we need to make something unequivocally clear right out of the gate. This book contains highly politically charged content.
Very much so.
It deals with deeply contentious views on gender, feminism, and institutional politics. So we are stepping into this text strictly as impartial guides.
We are not taking any sides today.
Not at all. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the text, nor are we condemning them.
Right.
Our sole mission is to objectively report, synthesize, and just convey the ideas and arguments contained in Riker's original source material. We want you to fully understand the author's perspective and the architecture of his arguments so you can just, evaluate them for yourself.
With that foundation set, let's just get right into the text itself.
Do it.
So the book doesn't start with modern political debates or social media algorithms or anything like that.
No, not at all.
It goes all the way back to human prehistory.
Yeah.
Riker starts his argument by going straight for the foundational concept of modern sociology, the patriarchy,
Right, but he anchors his critique of it in biology.
literally in Neolithic skeletal remains.
It's a fascinating starting point, honestly. The text argues that traditional gender roles are not arbitrary social constructs that were just forced onto humanity. Rather, they are biological imperatives honed by millions of years of evolution.
It's a very deliberate place for him to start. He's trying to establish a biological baseline to dismantle the whole idea that gender roles were historically imposed by some sort of patriarchal overlord.
Exactly. When the book examines those Neolithic skeletons, it details specific osteological markers.
The bone stuff.
Right. The text points out that male skeletons from that era show distinct adaptations for heavy labor, blunt force trauma, and combat.
We're talking about bone density and repetitive stress markers that indicate a life spent hunting, carrying massive loads, defending territory.
Conversely, the female skeletons from the exact same eras show anatomical adaptations specialized for gathering, mobility around a home base, and obviously, most crucially, childbearing.
Now, if the text argues this division is purely biological, how does it reconcile that with the idea of societal oppression?
Well, that's the thing.
Because the standard sociological narrative often views that historical division of labor as the very beginning of female subjugation. Does he address that directly?
He does, and he uses the Kungsan tribe of the Kalahari Desert to illustrate his counter-argument.
Ah, right.
The Kungsan are a modern hunter-gatherer society, and they maintain a very distinct division of labor where men hunt and women gather.
Right.
Riker argues this isn't oppression, it's ruthless evolutionary efficiency.
Because in an environment where mere survival is a daily struggle, a society just cannot afford to arbitrarily assign roles based on a desire to oppress.
Exactly. It assigns roles based on biological optimization. He brings up the hormonal realities that drive this too.
The testosterone versus oxytocin argument.
Yeah. The text details how testosterone mechanistically drives competition, risk-taking, and the explosive bursts of energy you'd need for a hunt or a battle. And on the flip side, women have significantly higher levels of oxytocin, which promotes bonding, nurturing, and social cohesion.
He even brings ancient Sparta into the mix to drive this point home, right? Because usually Sparta is brought up as the ultimate hyper-masculine, almost toxic militaristic society.
But Riker frames it totally differently.
Yeah.
The book frames Sparta not as a misogynistic dystopia, but as a highly specialized society that was facing constant existential threats.
Right, they were always at war or preparing for it.
Exactly. So in Sparta, the men were optimized entirely for warfare and state defense, while the women managed the estates, the economy, and the raising of the next generation.
So Riker posits that this wasn't a system designed to punish women.
No, he says it was a system that maximized the biological strengths of both sexes just to ensure the basic survival of the city-state.
It's a fascinating reinterpretation of history.
Yeah.
And it perfectly sets up what is arguably the most provocative concept in the first part of the book.
The blood price.
Yes. Riker takes this historical evolutionary lens and turns it directly onto the modern concept of male privilege.
He really goes after that concept.
The underlying thesis in this chapter is that history is not a story of patriarchal oppression, where men lived in luxury while women suffered. Instead, he frames history as a story of profound, systemic male sacrifice.
And that's where he introduces the concept of the blood price.
Unpack that for us.
The blood price is really the central pillar upon which the rest of his historical analysis rests. The argument is that the modern world, the infrastructure, the safety, the technology, was not built on male privilege.
It was built on brutal, life-shortening male labor.
Exactly. And to ground this concept, the text spends a significant amount of time detailing the grim realities of the 19th century English coal mines.
Let's spend some time on that, actually, because the picture he paints of the Industrial Revolution is just grim.
It is incredibly bleak.
It completely counters the narrative of the privileged male breadwinner who just sat at the head of the table.
It absolutely does. Riker points out that the men working those coal mines had an average life expectancy of just 32 years.
32. That's practically a death sentence.
Right. They worked 14-hour days, 6 days a week, in suffocating, collapsing, pitch-black tunnels. They suffered from black lung, cave-ins, gas explosions.
And the book argues that modern feminist theory often views the male breadwinner role of the Industrial Revolution as this position of domestic power and privilege.
But Riker frames it as an inescapable economic trap.
Right, these men weren't hoarding power.
No, they were trading their physical health and ultimately their lives, simply so their wives and children could have food and shelter. The privilege, as Riker puts it, was simply the right to die early in the dark.
Wow. And the book doesn't stop with the coal mines. It pulls examples from all across history to reinforce this blood price concept.
It really spans centuries.
It brings up the Transcontinental Railroad, detailing the thousands of men who died blasting through the Sierra Nevada mountains with highly unstable explosives.
It talks about the medieval serfs bound to just backbreaking agricultural labor.
And then the text turns to military history, specifically the trenches of World War I. And this is where the statistics really challenge the conventional narrative.
The sheer scale of the carnage is what Riker uses to make his point here. He notes that over 8.5 million men died in World War I.
8.5 million.
But the specific statistic he highlights is the life expectancy of a British soldier on the Western Front once they actually entered the trenches.
What was it?
It was just 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah. Riker uses this horrific reality to pose a really direct question to the reader. He asks, how can any sociologist logically categorize a demographic as the privileged, oppressive class when the society they supposedly run systematically drafts them, puts them in uniforms, and sends them to die as expendable pawns by the millions?
And he bridges this historical sacrifice right into the modern day. He doesn't just treat the blood price as some relic of the past that we've evolved past.
No, he says it's still happening right now.
He cites contemporary occupational hazard statistics, pointing out that even right now, today, men still account for 93% of all workplace fatalities in the United States.
93%. That's massive.
Right. They entirely dominate the most physically dangerous professions. Logging, deep-sea fishing, roofing, resource extraction.
Which is really where his critique of modern feminism begins to take its shape in the book.
Right. How does he connect the two?
Riker argues that the modern feminist movement hasn't just ignored this dynamic, He claims they have actively rewritten history to erase these physical sacrifices.
Erasing the blood price.
Yes. By erasing the blood price, he argues, society has been trained to view men solely as oppressors rather than the builders and protectors who literally laid the physical groundwork for civilization.
He views this historical revisionism as a profound betrayal of true equality.
He really does.
So if the physical foundation of society is built on this blood price, as the book calls it, then how did the cultural narrative shift so dramatically?
That's the big question.
How did we get from recognizing the sacrifice of the coal miner to the modern concept of the toxic patriarchy?
The text points directly to the mid-20th century, specifically the importation of Marxist frameworks.
Okay, break that down for us.
Riker argues that feminism didn't just casually evolve. He claims it morphed from a noble fight for equal opportunity, like the suffragettes securing the right to vote into a crusade for female supremacy and state dependence.
And he traces this ideological shift directly back to Marxism.
He does. The ideological lineage he draws here is very specific, and it is crucial to understanding the rest of the book.
Where does it start?
He starts with Simone de Beauvoir and her highly influential 1949 book, The Second Sex.
Okay.
According to Riker's analysis, de Beauvoir essentially took Karl Marx's framework of economic class struggle, the idea of the oppressive bourgeoisie and the oppressed proletariat, and she applied it directly to gender.
So instead of factory owners exploiting workers, it became husbands exploiting wives.
Exactly.
Men are framed as the inherent oppressor class and women as the inherent victim class.
That's exactly it. The real paradigm shift Riker is trying to highlight here is that viewing gender through a Marxist lens inherently requires a victim and an oppressor.
Right, it's a binary.
It shifts the relationship between men and women from a collaborative survival strategy, like we saw with the Kung San or the early industrial families, into a zero-sum power struggle.
If one side is winning, the other must be losing.
Yes. The text argues that this foundational shift weaponized Marxist rhetoric to turn men into the inherent enemy of progress.
The book also brings in the Frankfurt School and their development of critical theory, which is interesting.
Very much so.
For those listening who might not be deep into sociological theory, how does the author connect the Frankfurt School to the modern gender debate?
Well, when Riker brings up the Frankfurt School, he's specifically pointing to their approach of relentless critique.
Right.
Critical theory operates on the premise that traditional institutions, whether that's capitalism, the legal system, or the nuclear family, are inherently designed to maintain power structures.
And therefore, they have to be dismantled to achieve true liberation.
Exactly. Riker argues that feminist theorists adopted this approach entirely. He points to prominent figures like Shulamith Firestone.
What did she argue?
She didn't just advocate for equal pay, she actually argued for the complete abolition of the nuclear family.
Really?
Yeah. Firestone believed that true equality could only be achieved when women were freed from the biological burden of childbirth and the social structure of marriage altogether.
Wow. And Riker draws a very stark parallel here. He compares these radical feminist theories directly to the actual gender policies that were implemented by the Soviet Union under Lenin and Stalin.
That's a huge part of his argument.
What's the historical comparison he's making there?
He claims that the Soviet state, particularly in its early years, actively sought to abolish traditional gender roles and the nuclear family. They saw the family unit as a direct threat to state loyalty.
Because your loyalty should be to the state, not your spouse.
Exactly. So the Soviets heavily promoted women entering the industrial workforce and attempted to communalize child rearing.
And what does Riker say the result of that was?
Riker argues that the result of these policies was the complete emasculation of men. It stripped them of their roles as providers and protectors, while effectively making women and children wards of the state.
And he sees modern feminism as utilizing this exact same Marxist playbook.
Yes. Pushing for policies that replace the traditional role of the father with the bureaucratic apparatus of the government.
Which brings us to a major concept in the book.
Right.
Institutional capture.
Right.
Riker argues that this Marxist feminist ideology didn't just stay confined to radical academic papers in the 1970s. It actively took over the institutions that shape our society.
And he uses the growth of higher education as his primary metric for this capture.
The statistics he provides to illustrate this shift are actually pretty wild.
They are. He notes that in 1970, there were 0 gender studies programs in American universities. 0.
Okay.
By the year 2020, there were over 900.
900.
And Riker doesn't describe these programs as objective academic explorations of history. He characterizes them as outright centers of ideological indoctrination.
How so?
According to the book, these departments teach young women that men and the patriarchy are the root cause of all societal ills, while actively silencing or punishing any dissenting male perspectives on campus.
The downstream effects on education that he outlines are pretty alarming, honestly.
Yeah, the data is grim.
He points out that male college enrollment has absolutely plummeted. Women now make up nearly 60% of all college students, leaving male enrollment languishing at around 40%.
He calls this the feminization of education.
But it's not just happening at the university level, right? He traces this institutional bias all the way down to elementary schools.
He does. He argues that the modern education system fundamentally pathologizes natural boy behavior.
Pathologizes it.
Yes. The competitive, high-energy traits that he earlier identified as evolutionary imperatives are now treated as behavioral disorders in the classroom.
Like they need to be medicated or punished out of them.
Exactly. He cites data from California public schools, noting that boys are 3 times more likely to be suspended than girls.
3 times.
Riker argues that zero-tolerance policies and the removal of physical recess disproportionately target male behavior. It effectively punishes boys simply for being boys.
Which alienates them from the educational system entirely from a very young age.
Right.
So if the education system is essentially pathologizing natural male behavior from kindergarten all the way through college, as Riker argues, it really begs the question of what happens when those boys grow up and enter the workforce.
Or the dating pool.
Exactly. And that transitions us into the cultural environment this has created. Specifically, a concept Riker calls the double bind of modern masculinity.
The double bind, yeah, it's a psychological term, and Riker uses it to describe a state where a person is given 2 conflicting messages, and no matter how they react, they fail.
It's a lose-lose situation.
Exactly. He argues that modern men are trapped in exactly this scenario. On one hand, society, and often the women they date, still subconsciously demand that men fulfill the traditional biological roles.
Be a strong, stoic provider. Be decisive. Be a leader.
Right. But the second a man exhibits those traits too assertively, he is heavily penalized and labeled toxic or patriarchal.
And then there's the flip side of that coin. Men are constantly bombarded with messaging from the media, from cultural commentators, telling them to open up.
Be vulnerable.
Right, to cry,
Yeah.
to share their insecurities. But the text argues this is a total trap.
It does. Riker argues that when men actually follow that advice and show genuine vulnerability, they are almost universally penalized for it.
They're viewed as weak or unmasculine or even repulsive.
The book shares a very telling anecdote about a man named John to illustrate the professional side of this bind.
Oh, the executive.
Yeah, John is an executive who was highly praised at work. His bosses called him a natural leader because of his assertiveness and his decisiveness.
Right.
But in his personal life, his in-laws called him aggressive and domineering for displaying those exact same traits.
He also shares a much more personal story, which I found really interesting, about a man whose girlfriend repeatedly demanded that he be more emotionally available.
Right, she wanted him to let his guard down.
So he finally opened up about his deep-seated insecurities regarding his career and his self-worth.
And what happened?
According to the book, she instantly lost respect for him.
Instantly.
She called him whiny, and worse, she weaponized those exact insecurities against him in future arguments.
Riker uses that anecdote to highlight the extreme danger of the double bind. He even mentions the actor Terry Crews.
Right, Terry Crews.
Noting how Crews learned the hard way that society loves to praise male vulnerability in theory, but it often ruthlessly punishes men for it in practice.
Riker argues this double bind isn't an accident, does he?
No, he says it is a cultural trap designed to keep men constantly off balance, second-guessing their own instincts, and he links this directly to the skyrocketing rates of male anxiety and depression.
And this cultural trap, this environment of constant scrutiny, Riker argues, was absolutely supercharged by the hashtag #MeToo era.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, to be clear, the text acknowledges that the hashtag #MeToo movement started with noble intentions.
It did. It began as a way to expose actual powerful predators who were using their influence to assault women like Harvey Weinstein.
But the book argues it very quickly devolves into something much darker.
The critique here is that hashtag #MeToo basically abandoned the foundational legal principle of due process.
Right.
Riker argues it morphed into a modern-day witch hunt where men were presumed guilty in the court of public opinion the very moment an accusation was made, regardless of evidence.
He provides several high-profile examples to illustrate how the goalposts shifted from exposing assault to essentially policing awkward or just undesirable male behavior.
Aziz Ansari is a prime example of that shift.
Exactly. Riker brings up the case of the comedian, Aziz Ansari, whose career was severely derailed over a viral article that described what was, by all accounts, just a bad, awkward date.
Right, it was entirely consensual.
But it was framed by the media under the umbrella of #MeToo. He also mentioned Senator Al Franken, whose political career was abruptly ended over a tasteless comedy photo taken years prior.
But the text also dives into cases where the accusations were entirely fabricated and the consequences were literally life-destroying.
The story of Brian Banks.
That one is incredibly harrowing.
For those listening who aren't familiar, Riker spends considerable time on this case. Banks was a high school football star, an absolute standout with a full-ride scholarship to USC and a clear path to the NFL.
And he was falsely accused of rape by a classmate.
And the key detail Riker emphasizes is the pressure of the system.
Right. Facing decades in prison if he went to trial and lost in a climate where male guilt is basically presumed, Banks was pressured by his own counsel into taking a plea deal.
He spent 5 grueling years in state prison,
followed by 5 more years on parole as a registered sex offender.
His life, his reputation, his NFL dreams were entirely destroyed.
All before his accuser was finally caught on tape admitting she had completely fabricated the story just to get a payout from the school district.
It's unbelievable. Riker uses the Brian Banks tragedy, along with the infamous Duke lacrosse case, to highlight a terrifying reality for modern men.
False accusations, when amplified by a biased media and a hyper-reactive culture, can destroy a man's life overnight.
And there is almost zero accountability or legal consequence for the women who lie.
None. And the fallout from this cultural shift is entirely measurable in the professional world.
This is where it gets into the corporate impacts.
The book cites a highly revealing 2018 study conducted by Leanin.org and SurveyMonkey. It revealed that a staggering 60% of male managers are now actively uncomfortable mentoring, socializing with, or working one-on-one with female colleagues.
60%. That is a massive chilling effect.
It is huge. Riker uses this statistic to argue that the #MeToo movement hasn't created a safer, more equitable workplace. Instead, it has created a paranoid workplace.
Men are terrified of false accusations.
Or misinterpreted intentions, or an offhand comment just ending their entire career.
The ultimate irony, as Riker points out, is that this paranoia actively harms women's career advancement.
Right, by denying them access to valuable mentorship and professional networking opportunities from senior male leadership.
So we have this intense paranoia in the workplace and a broader cultural presumption of guilt. But Riker argues that these ideologies haven't just targeted the office or the university. They have aimed their sights at an even more foundational institution,
The family.
the family. The text claims that feminist policies have intentionally dismantled the nuclear family, and it traces the beginning of this collapse to a specific legal change in the 1970s.
The book points directly to the introduction of no-fault divorce laws.
Right.
Prior to this, dissolving a marriage actually required proving a breach of the marital contract like infidelity, abuse, or abandonment.
Riker notes that no-fault divorce, which was heavily championed by second-wave feminists as a necessary tool to liberate women from oppressive marriages, completely altered the legal landscape.
According to his data, the introduction of these laws led to a massive 150% increase in divorce rates by 1980.
The text argues that this fundamentally changed the very nature of marriage for men. It transformed marriage from a sacred, lifelong partnership into a high-stakes legal gamble where a man could lose his home, his assets, and access to his children, even if he did absolutely nothing wrong.
And this leads directly into Riker's blistering critique of the family court system.
He does not hold back on the family courts.
Not at all. He argues that the system is overwhelmingly biased against fathers, effectively treating men as what he calls walking ATMs.
Walking ATM.
Yeah. The book notes that in roughly 90% of custody cases, mothers are awarded primary or sole custody.
Even in situations where fathers are actively fighting for shared parenting.
Exactly. And to put a human face on these statistics, he shares a story of a father who went through this exact grinder.
This was a tough read.
This man spent 3 years of his life and over $100,000 in legal fees just trying to get 50-50 custody of his own children.
He wasn't abusive. He wasn't absent.
No, he just wanted to be an equal parent. And at the end of the process, he was reduced by the court to a weekend dad, relegated to seeing his kids a few days a month while paying crippling child support.
Riker uses cases like this to introduce the concept of the father gap.
The father gap.
If the family courts are systematically removing fathers from the home, what is the societal cost?
According to the data he presents, the cost is absolutely catastrophic.
He emphasizes two really stark statistics here.
Right. 85% of youths in prison come from fatherless homes.
85%.
And 63% of youth suicides occur in homes without a father present.
Those numbers are staggering. And the book tries to explain the human reality behind those statistics by contrasting two different life trajectories.
Marcus and Sarah.
Yeah. He shares the story of Marcus, a young boy who grew up without a dad. Without that male authority figure and role model, Marcus felt invisible and unguided.
Right, he started acting out, seeking validation in the streets.
And eventually ended up as part of that 85% statistic, incarcerated.
Riker contrasts Marcus's tragic trajectory with the story of Sarah, which he uses to illustrate the false promises of the feminist narrative for women.
According to the book, Sarah bought completely into the have-it-all corporate feminist ethos.
She prioritized climbing the corporate ladder and viewed her marriage and children as secondary obligations.
And she eventually initiated a no-fault divorce just to focus more on her career.
But years later, she experienced deep regret, realizing that the corner office, the money, and the corporate prestige couldn't replace the profound fulfillment of the family she had fractured.
If we extrapolate from the arguments Riker is making here about family court and divorce, he is essentially suggesting we are witnessing a total collapse of marriage.
That's his phrase, yeah.
He argues that the modern rejection of chivalry and traditional courtship has completely broken the dating market.
He points out that basic traditional gestures, like a man holding a door open or offering to pay for a date, are now frequently scrutinized as patronizing or sexist microaggressions.
And the result of that, he argues, is a chaotic landscape filled with mixed signals.
He points to a Pew Research study indicating that 47% of adults under the age of 30 are currently single.
47%.
Riker posits that because men and women have been conditioned to view each other as ideological adversaries rather than complementary partners, the culture has devolved.
Devolved into what?
Into casual hookups, deep mistrust, and profound, widespread loneliness for both sexes.
Which brings us to the economic realities that Riker lays out. If you're listening to this and you're familiar with the manosphere or the broader men's rights movement, you have likely heard the gender wage gap debated before.
Right, it's a common talking point.
But what the book does differently here is how aggressively it attacks the prevailing narrative. Riker calls the wage gap an outright myth, and he brings the receipts.
He really tackles it head on. He cites contemporary data showing that when you look at highly competitive fields like the tech industry, women actually earn 99.1% of what men earn for the exact same roles.
99.1%.
But the real anchor of his economic argument is a comprehensive 2018 Harvard study.
Right, the Harvard study.
This study analyzed massive data sets and concluded that when you factor in variables that feminist narratives often ignore, things like total hours worked, danger pay, willingness to commute, and career interruptions for lifestyle choices, the overall unadjusted wage gap shrinks to a mere 2 cents.
2 cents.
2 cents.
Riker uses this Harvard data to make a much broader point about institutional honesty. He argues that major feminist organizations and media outlets are intentionally cherry-picking unadjusted data to maintain a lucrative victim narrative,
while entirely ignoring the actual systemic economic threats that are devastating working-class men.
This is a critical pivot in the book. He contrasts the obsession with the 2-cent wage gap with the catastrophic impact of automation and certain government policies on male-dominated industries.
For example, he cites the loss of 40,000 jobs in the Appalachian coal mining industry.
Jobs held almost exclusively by men who were the sole providers for their communities.
Riker points out that while these men's livelihoods were being destroyed, leaving entire regions in total economic despair, feminist advocates and urban elites were celebrating the decline of these industries as a victory over the patriarchy.
He argues there is a malicious double standard in how the economy treats male versus female labor.
He contrasts the loss of those blue-collar male jobs with the aggressive corporate promotion of pink-collar jobs like HR and administrative roles.
And the rise of strict corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas.
Riker argues these diversity quotas actively and intentionally marginalize highly qualified men. He brings up the infamous case of James Damore, the engineer at Google.
Yes.
Damore wrote an internal memo that essentially echoed some of the biological arguments Riker makes in Chapter 1.
Suggesting that differences in male and female representation in tech might be partly due to differences in biological interests rather than purely systemic sexism.
And he was immediately fired for it.
Precisely. Riker views the firing of James Damore as concrete proof that speaking what he considers to be objective truth in a feminist-captured corporate environment is now a punishable offense.
It serves as a warning to all men in the corporate world to keep their heads down and remain silent.
And this economic marginalization, the policing of speech in the workplace, is coupled with what the book terms the media misandry complex.
The media misandry complex.
Riker takes a hard look at how men are represented in pop culture and the news, and he notes a massive, undeniable shift in representation over the last 2 decades.
The statistics he pulls on media representation are stark. He notes that in the year 2000, roughly 80% of Hollywood blockbusters featured strong, competent male protagonists.
And by 2020?
By 2020, that number had dropped to 40%, with male characters frequently sidelined or entirely replaced.
But it's not just the quantity he's looking at, it's the quality of the portrayal.
Right. Riker argues the media routinely forces men into one of 2 caricatures. They are either framed as bumbling, incompetent idiots who need their wives to fix everything, the classic sitcom dad trope.
Or they are portrayed as dangerous, violent predators.
Exactly. There is no middle ground allowed for honorable, competent masculinity.
He also points out a glaring, frankly disturbing double standard in how the news media covers the very serious issue of domestic violence.
This is a huge point.
Riker cites data from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, stating that nearly 1 in 4 men experience severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime.
1 in 4.
1 in 4. Yet, as the text notes, the media almost exclusively covers female victims. Male suffering is completely ignored or sometimes even mocked in order to maintain the overarching narrative that men are solely the oppressors.
This systemic erasure of male suffering, the constant cultural denigration, and the economic marginalization all culminate in what is arguably the most sobering section of Riker's entire book.
The crisis in male mental and physical health.
Right. The statistics he presents here aren't just cultural observations. They are matters of life and death.
Globally, men are 3.88 times more likely to die by suicide than women.
Almost 4 times more likely.
And yet, as Riker argues, society, the government, and the mainstream media largely ignore this epidemic. There are no national telethons for the male suicide rate.
He attempts to explain the psychology behind this epidemic with a concept he calls the emotional desert.
The emotional desert.
The theory is that men in the modern world are completely starved of emotional validation. The biological instincts that Riker discussed in the first chapter, the innate drive to protect, to provide, to build, and to lead, are now actively shamed by society.
When men suppress these instincts to comply with modern norms, they feel hollow and lost.
But when they express them, they are labeled toxic.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the double bind we discussed earlier.
Exactly. And the result, according to the book, is a generation of men who are retreating from society, leading to profound isolation, crippling loneliness, and deep depression. The emotional desert is a place where men suffer in silence because they have been taught that their pain does not matter.
He uses healthcare funding to prove that society genuinely views male life as less valuable.
Right, he contrasts the societal response to women's health versus men's health.
For example, he points out that women's health issues, like breast cancer, rightfully receive massive amounts of public funding, corporate sponsorships, pink ribbons on NFL uniforms, and immense societal support.
But then he looks at men's health issues, specifically prostate cancer, which kills nearly the exact same number of people annually as breast cancer.
Yet prostate cancer research receives a fraction of the federal funding.
And there are almost 0 mainstream public awareness campaigns. Riker argues this funding disparity isn't just a bureaucratic oversight. It is a direct, measurable result of a culture that fundamentally views men as disposable.
It goes right back to the blood price society expects men to die quietly.
It is an incredibly bleak diagnosis of modern society.
If you stop reading there, it is a profoundly depressing book. But Riker doesn't just leave his readers in despair.
No, he spends the final chapters pivoting from diagnosis to prescription, laying out a highly specific, actionable roadmap for men.
He advocates for what he boldly calls a masculinity renaissance.
The masculinity renaissance is his call to arms. He argues that the only way forward is for men to unapologetically return to traditional values concepts like honor, duty, leadership, physical strength, and the protection of the vulnerable.
He insists these are not outdated, oppressive concepts. They are the bedrock upon which all successful civilizations are built, and they must be reclaimed.
In terms of practical action, he highlights the critical role of the men's rights movement, or the MRM.
He doesn't just talk in abstract theory. He points to specific organizations doing the grueling legal work. For instance, he highlights the National Coalition for Men, the NCFM.
The NCFM is a key part of his strategy. He details how they have been fighting the grinding, unglamorous legal battles in state courts against the biased family court systems we discussed earlier.
They're the ones lobbying for default shared parenting laws and challenging the selective service system.
Riker emphasizes that men cannot rely on mainstream institutions, the universities, the legacy media, the HR departments, to save them because those institutions are fully captured.
Instead, men must bypass the feminist gatekeepers entirely.
He outlines a very modern strategy for how to bypass those gatekeepers. He tells his audience to leverage alternative media ecosystems.
He points to crowdfunding platforms like Patreon or Substack as vital tools to directly fund independent creators and thinkers who are willing to speak the truth.
He urges men to use platforms like X to build direct, unfiltered connections with audiences.
He views the success of alternative media as proof that the cultural tide is turning.
Right. He points to the massive growth of platforms like the Daily Wire and PragerU and the undeniable global cultural footprint of figures like Jordan Peterson.
To Riker, these aren't just media phenomena. They are proof of a massive, starving demographic of men who are desperate for content that speaks to them with respect rather than shaming them for their masculinity.
He also uses the documentary film The Red Pill by Cassie Jaye as a prime example of this strategy in action.
For those who don't know, Jay was a feminist filmmaker who set out to make a hit piece on the men's rights movement.
But through her interviews, she ended up realizing the legitimacy of their grievances. Her film was blacklisted by mainstream theaters, but it found a massive audience through independent distribution.
And he scales that concept all the way up to Hollywood blockbusters. Riker points to the staggering box office explosion of the movie Top Gun, Maverick.
That film grossed over $1.4 billion globally.
Riker argues it didn't succeed because of nostalgia. It succeeded because it was a pure, unapologetic rejection of modern Hollywood messaging.
It was undeniable proof of the immense global demand for traditional male-centric storytelling that celebrates honor, competence, unapologetic patriotism, and brotherhood.
So if we look at Riker's ultimate practical advice to his audience, to the men reading the book, he is telling them to stop apologizing for existing.
He urges them to actively build strong, supportive male communities, whether that is online forums or in-person fraternities, to combat the emotional desert.
He tells them to absolutely and categorically reject the historical guilt that society tries to place on them for the sins of the patriarchy.
Most crucially, he advises men to assert their value by leaning heavily into areas where objective merit still matters over ideological quotas.
He points to fields like hard technology, civil engineering, and independent entrepreneurship.
It is a comprehensive, defiant call to action. Riker's overarching thesis is that by embracing their biological imperatives and refusing to accept the narrative of toxic masculinity, men can reclaim their identity, rebuild their fractured families, and ultimately stabilize a society that he believes is currently teetering on the edge of collapse.
Okay, to briefly recap the massive, incredibly dense scope of this deep dive.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did.
Yeah.
We have unpacked Conrad Riker's 2025 book, Men's Rights Matter. We explored how he attempts to trace the roots of modern gender dynamics all the way from ancient Neolithic biology and the concept of the historical blood price.
For what he identifies as the Marxist ideological capture of modern feminism via figures like de Beauvoir.
We looked at how he uses this expansive historical framework to explain the current perilous state of men's rights in the biased family courts, the paranoid corporate workplace, and a hostile mainstream media.
It is an expansive, highly provocative, and deeply structural argument. And as we wrap up this analysis, it leaves us with a lingering question to ponder something that requires looking beyond the text itself and observing the world around us.
What's the question?
If, as Riker argues, the foundational physical infrastructure of our civilization, from the power grid that keeps our hospitals running to the deep-sea rigs that fuel our economy, to the physical security of our national borders, relies almost entirely on the innate male biological drive to protect, provide, and sacrifice.
Right.
What happens to the physical and economic stability of a society that successfully conditions its next generation of young men to entirely abandon those exact traits?
That is a profound question and something to truly mull over long after this discussion ends.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As a final reminder, please hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss one of our comprehensive analyses.
And if you want to explore the source material for yourself and we highly recommend you do to understand the full scope of his arguments. Go check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Conrad Reicher's ebook, Men's Rights Matter: Why Feminism Has Gone Too Far.
And be sure to follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack for more of his ongoing content.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep digging deeper and stay curious.